That's what happens when you're too slack to choose your own music for walk on. Okay, I know what you're thinking. I was a little bit skinnier when that photograph was taken. I've got a lot to get through, and so I've got some notes on my iPhone. If I look down from time to time, I just want you to know I'm not checking my email, and that I'm just making sure that I don't miss anything out. First, a bit of background. My journey in a nutshell. I was born in Sydney of Italian parents and grew up on and around the suburban streets and beaches of the eastern suburbs. I studied commerce and law at the University of New South Wales. I actually practiced law for a split second in the early 80s, more on that later, before heading to New York, where I studied and did my MBA. Soon after I returned to Sydney, I turned my back on this apparent corporate fast track and began my first big adventure as a full-time entrepreneur, or as my mother would say at the time, "Darling, you've got 3 degrees and you're opening a shop. Please help me understand." I founded the Remo General Store in 1988. That's me in the front row holding the plunger. And this is the logo. Some of you might be old enough to remember that store and its catalogues. Can I have a show of hands just so that I know? Okay, that's pretty good. 50%. 50% over 40, 50% under 40. Is that? We generated a lot of heat, marketplace heat in the late 80s and early 90s. Bit of press there. I think we put a dent in the culture. We grew too fast, but with the wrong kind of funding. That's revenue, single store revenue growth from 88 to 96. But then it all blew up. Ouch, that hurt. I can remember it as if it was yesterday. In 2001, I applied, back living in New York, this time with a young family. I applied what I'd learnt about creating and developing customer communities to the development of a social network for creative professionals called General Thinking. I relaunched that network. There's General Thinking. I relaunched that network about 18 months ago, and it's growing really strongly, and I'm really happy with it. 1,007 general thinkers all over the world as of the other day when I took that screenshot. And then more recently, in 2009, I was approached by my longtime friends and associates at the TED conferences in New York, asking me if I would be their person in this part of the world and take on the license for TEDx Sydney. TEDx Sydney is today a flagship TEDx event held annually at the Sydney Opera House that's become, in my opinion, and that of others, the leading platform for the propagation of Australian ideas, creativity, and innovation to the rest of the world. It also happens to be the biggest TEDx event in the world. So that's my entrepreneurial journey in a nutshell, and this is how it all comes together on a business card. I scored myself an 8 on that ID rating because I always think there's a little bit of room for improvement. As a serial founder and brand builder, I've experienced both great successes and some really, truly brilliant failures in my life to date, all the while learning lots about myself and others. And here's the thing, I reckon that the skills and qualities that go into making a successful entrepreneur are also enable leaders and teams and individuals to cut through within an organizational context. What I've learned about innovation and creativity, I've learnt at the customer and member coalface, which is an exhilarating, albeit terrifying place to be. So over the next 15 or so minutes, I'm going to rattle through 10 things that I've learned or observations that I've made in my career thus far, and I'm hoping that at least one of them will have some relevance to you in your lives, or some of them apply generally. Some of them are quite specific to the bittersweet life of an entrepreneur. So here we go. Number 1, do good work. This one's somewhat self-evident. It's that good work is its own reward. The best marketing is a delighted customer. The old push model of marketing is dead. These days, it's all about positive experience and online referral. It's the product, stupid. So stop polishing those turds. Don't you love Google image search? Polished turds. Fine. So stop polishing those turds and focus on developing the best possible product or experience that you can. That's me banging on about the doing of good work at TEDx Sydney in 2012 at CarriageWorks. And I've also baked this directive into the Manifesto for General Thinking, which in summary has a motto that put simply says, do good work, have some fun, which in Guy Kawasaki's terms is the mantra and what I was repeating to myself backstage as I was nervously waiting to come around here. Number 2, vision. Clarity of vision is critical, and you've just heard a big debate about all of that. If you don't know what it's all about, your employees and customers will have no hope. And it's not good enough to just have the vision. You have to be able to communicate and galvanize and inspire people around that vision. It's always better also when people understand why they are doing what they are doing, and ideally why those reasons are worthwhile. Being able to give people context and a shared sense of purpose is, I believe, and as you've heard earlier, a big important part of being an effective leader. Check out this inside front cover from the October 1995 Remo catalogue. A statement of mission followed by an articulation of core values. Geez, we had a lot back then. And then at the bottom there, and you thought we just sold you stuff. Here's a product development vision for Remo that is quite literally driven by the brand. Coffee, gelato, and jam are food. T-shirts and stripy things are clothes. Wall planners and notebooks are knowledge. This enabled our customers and staff to understand why we were developing the things that we were developing and how they fitted in within this paradigm. Another example, here's a visualization of what a general thinking city hub might look like down to the abstractions of the functions there in the centre. It might not actually look like this, but I think this diagram serves to help communicate to people what the energy of the space might be. Finally, there's a doodle that I used to sell the vision for TEDx Sydney this year. Once again, doesn't look much like the Sydney Opera House, but it does communicate the sense of that event and its scope. What's cool, what's daggy, and who decides? Some things are really quite wonderful, but you can't always explain why. Listen to your inner voices, hone and trust your own instincts about what feels right and what feels wrong. And this applies to people too. There's Bob D'Angelo in my 1973 class photo, and that's me to the right. Bob was a very cool guy, you could feel it. But there's Bob's belt. Woven elastic with a faux heraldic clasp at the front, metal sliders at the side. At the time, the epitome of dagginess at my school, until Bob wore the belt, and then it became cool. The anatomy of cool. That's alchemy, and proof positive that some turds can in fact be polished. Some people derive creativity from chaos, but my experience has been quite the opposite. I think that we need to better appreciate the value of systems in the creative process. Having a system in place, I reckon, enhances your capacity to be creative. It's like knowing that the bars on the jungle gym are sturdy. When that's the case, you're able to swing higher and more confidently. I wrote a book last year. You've seen me signing it in the foyer, naturally enough, called General Thinker, a visual memoir. Anyway, the hardest part was designing the structure for the template for the 90-chapter spreads. And here was my solution. Words to the left, hero image to the right, secondary images underneath that, timeline device under that, chapter cross-referencing throughout. Once that was done, the rest was easy. It was a joy. I was just filling the buckets. If I had set out to write a traditional business memoir, I'd probably still be writing it today. Another example. When I was a merchant, I broke the entire Remo range down into modules that were manifest in the store, in the catalogues, online, and in these colour-coded plexiglass cubes, merchandise McNuggets. This poster had QR codes on it, which was manifest in 3D form by those freestanding pods, had QR codes on it that linked to the relevant web pages. Structure enhancing creativity. This is an important one, the name of my talk, General Thinking. All of my experience has reinforced my belief in the power of diversity as a driver for creativity and innovation. The premise behind general thinking, and here's an explanation, a visual explanation of the logo, is that fresh insights and responses to projects and challenges are more likely to emerge when thinkers and doers across all disciplines collaborate shoulder to shoulder. Scientists addressing social issues, artists thinking about business challenges, etc. The thinking is not new. TED began life in 1984 as an extraordinary event that brought together thinkers and practitioners across three, at the time, converging fields: technology, entertainment, design, TED, TED. TED was arguably the poster child of the convergence movement and has become even more diverse as over time. Conferences like TED, TEDx Sydney, and indeed this Wired for Wonder will continue to provide an ideal environment for leaders and thinkers who are looking to connect the dots. Network. A golden thread, and I had to do this thinking when I was writing the book, what's the common thing? A golden thread connecting all of my work over many years has been the creation, development, and nurturing of passionate and engaged customer or member networks. The Remo Customer Network, a community consumption model. General Thinking, an invitation-only social network of people doing good and smart work in the world. And TEDx Sydney, the TEDx Sydney member network, like-minded and curious people connected by virtue of their shared appreciation of ideas and content. And structurally, they all look something like that. Everyone is connected and visible to one another. The network is both the marketing engine and the development engine for the brand or business. This is not push model B to C, B equals C, them equals us. The community is the brand. A network structure really is a better mousetrap for any customer-facing business. And here's another thing. I would contend that any business or brand, however large or small, that serves a community of customers or members or readers or viewers can be better and more effective at what it does by the application of some of this network modelling and thinking. Customer. My doodles usually begin with a stick figure, and I just have to point out there, by the way, it took me 8 years to figure out that the last 4 letters of customer were Remo in reverse. So that was a very thrilling day in 1994, I can tell you. My doodles usually begin with a stick man, and the stick man usually lives right at the centre of the action. Customer centricity, a central tenet of design thinking, is really no more than a marketplace reflection of the golden rule, otherwise known as the ethic of reciprocity, that says, treat others as you would like to be treated yourself. For me, the value of that empathy is all common sense. Back to the Remo logo. This is me. In fact, it was modelled on a profile of me initially. This is me, but it's also you. As the architect and designer of a product or experience, the best thing you can do, I reckon, is put yourself in the place of the customer. What do you want that experience to be? If enough people care about what you care about, then you not only have a business, you can also take comfort in the knowledge that all you really need to do is please yourself. Nurture your rebels. I told you earlier that I was briefly a lawyer in the early 80s. There's the proof. That was only half the truth. Although employed and paid as a solicitor by Baker & McKenzie, I actually spent very little of my time doing legal work. I was more interested in the dynamics of the organisational environment. And that's when I decided to propose something to the partners. I would found and edit a weekly newsletter designed to inform, amuse and unite a firm that was growing fast and trying to maintain a unified culture across multiple offices. Every week I would gather news and other ephemera and package it into this 2-page newsletter. Memorandum was born, and I have to immodestly say became a huge hit at the firm. And in retrospect, I have to tip my hat to Baker & McKenzie. In terms of billable hours, my productivity left a lot to be desired. I would regularly draw smiley faces on my timesheets. Here's one from July 1984. Not only did they tolerate this, they actually nurtured and encouraged my self-appointed role as internal publisher and editor. That was smart and wise, and I repaid that wisdom with lots of good karma and happy vibes. Memorandum became a point of difference and another reason for top graduates at the time to choose Baker & McKenzie. Every organisation has its share of rebels and square pegs. I would argue that more often than not, they are your best source of fresh ideas and creativity. Therefore, I would challenge everyone in this room to think of ways to nurture those rebels and keep them engaged. Travel hopefully, be optimistic. I love this quote from Robert Louis Stevenson. To travel hopefully is a better thing than to arrive, and the true success is to labour. I actually remember the exact day back in 2001, whilst travelling on a ferry from New York to Fire Island, and there's a photo. It's not a reconstruction. That was the actual day that I'm talking about. That I came to the realisation that despite all of the failures and rejections that that necessarily accompany a risk-taking life, I remained unshakably optimistic. And that moreover, this feeling of optimism was providing me with a very high quality of life in the present. The same was true for my wife, Melanie. The personal epiphany I had was the realization that the outcomes of my endeavours were irrelevant to the quality of life that I was living in the present. Hope is paramount. Hope is the driver. And also within an organisational context, I think you'll find that it's the hopeful optimists who drive things forward for you. Finally, but importantly, persistence. The critical ingredient for all entrepreneurs, and indeed anyone trying to do anything good or different in the world, is persistence. What many fail to appreciate, especially younger people, I'm sounding old now, is that rejection and failure are actually the norm. The important thing is to keep trying to persist and not be defeated by rejection. You win some, you lose some. That's life. Rupert Murdoch, Barry Diller, Luciano Benetton, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The list goes on. And at a personal level, I spent literally 4 years courting my wife, Melanie. It took a 43-page letter handwritten on a tiny island in the Great Barrier Reef to finally do the trick. There's the letter. Courtship is a good story, I have to say. You can read about it in my book, chapter 38. Which brings us to the end of my 10-point rant. Here they are again in summary. I'm not going to read them, but you might want to take a photograph, or I'll give it to Sarah. I hope, and there's that word again, that there's something in there that you can use in your lives and in your work, or in your work. Thank you.